Man has described himself in many ways. But if we concentrate on man in relation to his control over his environment, no description is more apt than the description of man as a tool-making animal. And in the short history of mankind, the majority of the tools which man has made can be thought of as an extension of his muscle power. That is, the ability to perform work faster and in greater quantity. However, in the mid-1940s of the 20th century, a different kind of tool was invented. A tool for extending certain of the powers of man's mind. This tool is the electronic computer. It is the fast, reliable, and tireless performance of a variety of arithmetic and logical operations that gives the computer its great utility and power. But merely looking at a computer won't tell us very much about what it actually is doing. Neither will this tell us anything about the revolutionary material and intellectual effects of such machines. We can easily see the material and intellectual effects of, say, machines for transportation. We know that the modern jet aircraft represents a great increase in speed over the earliest aircraft. We also know that modern airplanes have made the world smaller and changed our way of thinking about ourselves and our world. And future means of transportation will bring even more rapid and radical changes. But even the difference between the speed of an ox cart and the fastest rocket is small when compared with the difference in speed between calculation by hand and calculation by computer. For example, the first electronic calculator to be completed could do the work of 50,000 people working by hand. Scientists, when they speak of a great change in speed or size, prefer to speak in terms of a unit of measurement called an order of magnitude, meaning 10 times as much. Dr. Richard Hamming, a research mathematician for the Bell Telephone Laboratories, in a paper presented before a meeting of the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, put it this way.
The computer revolution is often compared with the famous Industrial Revolution in importance and scope. The Industrial Revolution effectively freed man from being a beast of burden. The computer revolution will similarly free him from dull, repetitive routine. The computer revolution is, however, perhaps better compared with the Copernican or the Darwinian revolution, both of which greatly changed man's idea of himself and the world in which he lives. Before getting into the main part of this paper, it is necessary to discuss briefly the idea of a change in a technology. Change is often measured in units of an order of magnitude, meaning roughly a factor of 10 times as much. It is a common observation that a change of an order of magnitude in a technology produces fundamentally new effects. As an illustration, consider the following example. Modern jet planes are about 1 order of magnitude faster than Wright brothers' first plane. Another example, the fastest missiles are somewhat more than 2 orders of magnitude faster, meaning about 300 times faster. Automobiles are used at speeds around 1 order of magnitude faster than a horse and wagon. Each of these have produced whole new effects. Indeed, it is said that the automobile has produced even a change in our morals. Computers have improved in speed by at least 6 orders of magnitude, a millionfold. In order to understand the factor of a million, consider the following two situations. First, that you have only $1, and second, that you have $1 million. You can readily see that in the two situations there are fundamentally different effects. You adopt a different view of yourself and the world in which you live. Along with the change in speed, there has been a great increase in reliability, so we now do much longer computations than when practicable by hand. Finally, with the increase in speed, there has been a corresponding decrease in the cost. Something more than 1,000 times cheaper. It is as if suddenly automobiles cost $2 to $4, houses $20 to $60. And the changes in the computer technology are still going on. These, then, are the...
We hardly need to be reminded that we live in a world that is becoming more complicated and more crammed with information every day. One description for this vast quantity of data on everything from the lifetime earning records of an individual to the beeps and pulses relayed to Earth from a space satellite uses that overworked word, explosion. This time, an information explosion. The computer is an invaluable tool for processing these millions of bits of information in accurate, fast, and economical fashion, in accordance with rules and instructions provided by the human programmer. In the most gigantic of all record-keeping jobs, the Social Security system, more than 1 million personal records can be processed in one day. This manufacturing plant is entirely computer-controlled in accordance with rules for decision-making stored in the machine's memory. This chemical plant for making polyisoprene was designed by a computer. In a recent example, a computer in 16 hours and out of 16,000 possible designs selected the design that most closely approached the ideal design as defined by the engineers. And this actual firing of the multi-million-dollar Saturn rocket was simulated on this computer many times before the actual firing was authorized. And these simulated firings, which helped eliminate many of the problems in the functioning of the rocket, cost only a fraction of what an actual launching would have cost. Each of these operations, record keeping and accounting, control, design, and simulation, is achieved through the manipulation of numbers according to instructions and rules given to the computer by the programmer. But what are these rules, and what is the relationship between numbers and the real things they are said to represent? These are some of the questions that we put to the scientist whom we've already seen, Dr. Richard Hamming, research mathematician at the Bell Telephone Laboratories.
Well, I would say that at present at the Bell Telephone Laboratories, we do about 10% of the experiments on a computer and about 90% in the laboratory. I would expect that in time we will do 90% on the computer and 10% in the lab. Speed, cost, and effort favor the computer over the laboratory approach. This advantage is possible because we construct a mathematical model rather than a material model. I use the word construct because the mathematical equations are the construction rather than a materialistic physical model. It is perhaps fortunate we have found, particularly in the field of physical sciences, that our predictions based upon the mathematical models agree very well with what we observe in the physical world.
The 19th century physicist Heinrich Hertz described the concept of a model in these words: "We make for ourselves internal pictures or symbols of external objects, and we make them of such a kind that the necessary consequences in thought of the internal pictures are always pictures of the necessary consequences in nature of the object symbolized."
The idea of a mathematical model is fairly easy to understand. A very simple, trivial example is the numbers you calculate on your check stubs. You combine the various numbers by addition and subtraction, and they correspond in a very real sense to the amount of money that you have in the bank. The mathematical model is the numbers you manipulate. The amount of money you actually have in the bank is the physical world. Let us consider now a slightly more complex example.
This is a common experience for most of us. The front end of the car dips sharply when we come to a sudden stop. In technical language, there is a transfer of weight from rear to front in the action of braking. A mathematical model of this transfer of weight can reveal exactly how much weight is on both wheels. And different road surfaces and braking conditions will result in different weight distributions. But the mathematical model for the transfer of weight from rear to front will remain the same.
In this mathematical model of behavior in an automobile, we can use a computer to simulate what would happen in actual practice. We have actually found that our mathematical models of automobile traffic predict very well many of the effects which we observe. Returning to our more general remarks about the use of computers, we first use computers to simulate situations in engineering, situations which we had been doing before by hand. The computers allowed us to do much larger and more complex problems. But this ignored the order of magnitude effect which we spoke of. We are now beginning to use the machines in entirely new ways on entirely different problems. And this is the exciting part. This is the intellectual aspect of applying the machines to completely new ideas that has so excited many people in the field.
One of the characteristics of human beings is that, among other things that they do, is that they solve problems. And what it means, of course, to solve a problem is being able to not only get an answer to a question that arises in a particular situation, but then to find other cases that are similar to the initial one, so that we are, in effect, in a position to solve not just one concrete problem, but a whole class of them.
This is Professor Ernest Nagel, a leading logician and philosopher from Columbia University.
Once a domain has been developed to the point where answers can be given from given set of assumptions simply by following some set of instructions or some rules, then it's not entirely evident that one should be thinking of the significance of every step that one is performing.
Well, is it also possible to instruct the machines to follow the rules of thought?
Indeed, I think this is, of course, the basis for having machines or computers, since their entire task consists in following a set of rules or programs, so that in a very short span of time, they're able to come out with an answer that would have taken human beings an extraordinary length of time to produce.
It seems to me that the computers, because they enable us to ask new questions, also enable us to get entirely new answers. They do not answer all the old questions, but because the questions are new, the answers are also new and very exciting. There is a strong tendency to speak of the machine as solving the problem, when in fact, really it is the program which describes to the machine what the machine is to do. This is overlooked, and I think a great deal of confusion arises from this. It is not that we do not have adequate machines to solve our problems many times, but rather we lack adequate descriptions of how to solve the problem. And this is a very important point to understand. As we spread out and learn more and more about our techniques of solving problems, we will be able to do wider and wider class of problems. And it is not the machine so much as it is our lack of ideas that controls.
Mathematics has been called the one universal language of mankind. It is perhaps our most powerful tool for problem solving. And in terms of subject matter, pure mathematics and logic are one and the same. The subject matter consists in the relations generally expressed by if, then necessarily. Computers have been called machines for logic. The human problem solver must first define the problem. He must also provide the machine with instructions as to the steps necessary to solve the problem. And then the machine will carry out these instructions accurately and with fantastic speed. All of this, of course, requires very precise logical thinking on the part of the problem solver. It is the machine's power to carry out these logical operations that gives it its great value as a tool for extending man's thought. Logic is not the science of how we think, thinking involves much more than logic. It is essential to logic and mathematics that, given a set of premises, the conclusion will follow in all cases. Results from a computer are the necessary conclusions arising from the data and rules of operation provided the machine by the human programmer. And yet, these conclusions can accurately reflect and foretell real-life situations. What is the nature of this remarkable correspondence between the abstract symbols of mathematics and logic and the real perceptible world of objects and events? We ask Professor Nagel to comment on this.
Well, I would like to say something about that, because this has been, I suppose, for many, many centuries, a problem that has occupied men, and because of the apparent agreement of what we might call reality or nature with the language that we employ, whether it is ordinary English or whether it is the language of mathematics, the apparent agreement between reality and the symbolic representation, men have speculated about, sometimes about the origin of the world, something about the necessity of there being some particular kind of creative agency. And so, if one asks, why is it that the consequences of assumptions that we make are in agreement with in nature, the answer is because nothing can count as an instance of the assumptions that we make unless the assumptions themselves are confirmed.
The electronic computer in the service of the human problem solver reflects back to him the consequences of the assumptions he employs when he builds a mathematical model of a real-life situation.
So that rather than saying, as for example, the late Sir James Jeans maintained, that the fact that mathematics is used in exploring nature, he maintained that this shows that there must have been a divine creator, and moreover that the creator was a mathematician. In terms of this simple reminder of the sorts of things that enter into applying any formal system to any segment of nature, one would have to say the reason why nature conforms to our assumptions is not that there was a mathematician who created it, but simply that nothing would count as an instance of the assumptions unless it also conformed to whatever consequence was deduced from it.
The problem-solving power of mathematics and logic, combined with the speed and accuracy of a machine for carrying out these operations, is the basis of the computer revolution. But does this mean that a computer can produce a new idea or make an original contribution to knowledge? We ask this question of both Professor Nagel and Dr. Hamming.
It depends entirely on what you mean by a new idea. In some senses, the machine only produces what you expect. On the other hand, you do not foresee all combinations, and the machine often produces combinations which you had not foreseen and have the impression of novelty.
Well, the question is to whether machines or computers are capable of original thought or of making original contributions to knowledge is a very much debated one, but before one can profitably discuss it, it seems to me it's very important to distinguish between two senses in which a statement or an idea might be said to be original. The two senses are a psychological sense of originality and a logical sense of originality. And I think perhaps the best way of making the distinction clear is first with an illustration. When a child is given an elementary arithmetical problem, for example, to find the sum of two numbers, when he gets the answer, the conclusion is something that is novel or new to him. So psychologically, of course, he gets the sense of having made a discovery. Nevertheless, the answer is something that is necessarily or logically implied in the premises or the assumptions, and the process of thought here simply is to unravel or make explicit what was already contained in a logical sense in the premises. I think I'd risk going out on a limb here and say that it seems to me that, at least on the basis of our present conceptions of the capacities of computers as well as the actual one that have been constructed, that computers do not come up with logically new ideas, and unless the nature of the beast changes very radically, that they cannot come up with logically new ideas, given the assumptions that underlie the present theory of computers.
Many people are attempting to use computers to replace man. I am much more interested myself in using man and machines as a working combination. I believe that some of the future is already fairly clear. It is obvious that the machines can do routine, logical consequences much more rapidly and much more accurately than a human can. Therefore, I believe we will gradually push the detailed logical parts, the methods which we use, onto the machine, and we will reserve for ourselves the creation of new ideas and the direction of the research. Thus, the man-machine combination will find a dividing line passing gradually from man over to machine, the machine taking more and more of the burden as we learn how to use the machines and as the machines become more powerful, and we will find ourselves left in the more creative aspects of the problem, deciding what it is worth attacking, what are the problems which we wish to solve. These kind of questions we do not know how to give the computer and seem best reserved for man at present.
I think we have to say that in this respect, the human mind is capable of doing things that none of the machines that are available today is capable of doing. This certainly doesn't foreclose the question whether sometime in the future machines might not be devised so that exactly this kind of a thing will be credited to machines. But at present, and this is all that one can say at the moment, there are clear lines of demarcation between the capacities of the human mind in respect to the capacity to make contributions to knowledge which is our original.
Dr. Hemming, will you give me some of your summary thoughts on this computer revolution?
Well, the word revolution is used very freely these days, and yet I think there's some meaning to the words the computer revolution. We have got an increase in computers of 1,000,000-fold, decrease in costs by 1,000, as we said before. This is a very real change. But the question still arises, will this revolution continue? It seems to me, in view of the political situation in the whole world, that no responsible group can oppose the coming computer revolution. Therefore, it seems to me we have a real one which will continue. Now, I believe that the reports we hear of this revolution are very misleading. They often underestimate the speed which is going on and the importance. But worst of all, they tend to emphasize the material aspects, how much we will have of this and that, how much leisure, what wonderful new things we will have, and they fail to discuss the impact it will have on our view of ourselves and our world outlook. This, I believe, is the most important part of the computer revolution.
I do think that as a consequence of these increased complexities in society and the obviously greater degree of control that will have to be exercised if we are not going to run into each other constantly, it does require us to think seriously as to how in the future we, or perhaps more specifically our children and grandchildren, will be able to realize the potentialities that we would like our own society to enable us to develop. We shall have to find ways of training ourselves how to enjoy the leisure that we presumably are going to have, the greater leisure that we're going to have, in such a way that instead of being frustrating and making life a perpetual boredom, will enable us to engage in creative activities. This seems to me to be the central problem that faces Western civilization insofar as the material goods of life are going to be increased, but it does raise a fundamental issue as to how what was sometimes called the spiritual aspect of life, or I would prefer to call it the creative aspect of individuality, will be given a room for development. Now, there's no simple answer to this question.
If there is any mystery in the computer revolution, let's be sure that the mystery is located in the right place. In spite of its magnetic memory, complex circuitry, and so on, the mystery is not in the machine. The sense of awe and mystery that we may experience when we see a computer in operation is really awe at the accumulated months and years of thinking by human problem solvers reflected back to us at fantastic speed. A computer scientist once remarked that we have machines that compute with the speed of light, but with the intelligence of the earthworm. While it is true that the computer can be called a kind of brain, although a very limited one, in order to solve any problem, the computer must first be instructed by a human programmer who has painstakingly and logically analyzed the problem. The computer is then given the problem in the form of numbers or instructions pertinent to arithmetic. It is the arithmetic logical task that the computer is organized to do. Once instructed, it can do as much arithmetic in a minute as a man in a lifetime. A man in a lifetime. The lifetime of all mankind is but a brief moment in the long history of this earth of ours, and only yesterday in the history of mankind has man made any significant advance in his control over his earthly environment. Computers, machines for logic, may change this more than any other of man's inventions. These machines, which have been with us less than a millionth of a second in terms of the temporal span of man's history, have already given promise of deep and far-reaching change in our way of life and way of thinking. They literally accelerate into milliseconds of time our ability to perform logical, arithmetic, and control tasks. But finally, the future, except in terms of trends and probabilities, is the great unknown, and the uses to which we put ourselves in relation to the marvelous machines of our own invention is perhaps the central moral and intellectual challenge of our own brief moment in time. This is NET, National Educational Television.
Paperwork. Oh, those dollars go.
Worse every year.
Figuring percentages really gets me.
It's the budgets. You know, I chew up more pencils. Markups, discounts, too much, too much.
There's gotta be an answer.
Introducing the answer. A really small calculator, a really silent electronic, a really fast thinker, one that works anywhere on battery or plug-in, one with all the calculator know-how you'll probably ever need. Introducing the world's smallest electronic calculator from the maker of the world's most complete line, Sharp. Introducing the LC8, world's smallest electronic calculator by Sharp. Price tag to match, $345 complete. LC8, the answer. See it.
was a question worth investigating.
I say, gentlemen, here's something interesting. Take a look at this dish.
This? Oh, yes. It's got a bit moldy, hasn't it? That's too bad. But after all, it happens all the time.
No, take a closer look. You notice anything odd?
Why? Why,
See that ring?
why, yes, it's clear, isn't it?
Right. I'd say something in that mold is destroying the stops in that dish.
That is interesting. What do you make of it?
I don't know. I think it's worth looking into. It looks good. Very good.
Well, I say, do you think perhaps there's something there we ought to follow up?
Perhaps. And perhaps, gentlemen, we've got a drug that will destroy infectious bacteria. But before we know, we've got work to do. Come in.
Dr. Fleming and his assistants undertook a number of experiments to test his idea that the mold might be a weapon against disease. First, they introduced the mold-infested broth into other cultures of bacteria. Later, they found that in many of these cultures, too, the bacteria were destroyed. But Dr. Fleming wondered if it killed bacteria, might it not also be harmful to living tissues? To determine this, they injected the drug into animals. They found that the animals were not harmed by the drug. Then, mixing it with human blood, Dr. Fleming determined that it did not harm the germ-killing cells in the bloodstream. Dr. Fleming reached the conclusion that he had found a drug that would destroy bacteria and that, some evidence indicated, would not harm human tissues. He published a paper describing his experiments. But this was only the beginning. 10 years later, another British scientist, Dr. Howard Florey, conducted a number of experiments to verify Fleming's findings, and then, along with other scientists, developed penicillin as a drug of amazing power against disease. But let's review this remarkable discovery method. First, a scientist begins with the perception of a problem. Dr. Fleming had been trying to find a drug that would prevent infection. This, combined with his long training in observation, enabled him to recognize a problem in the accident of the mold polluting the dish. The second step was to make preliminary observations. This brought him to the third stage in scientific method, thinking of a hypothesis or possible solution to the problem. Now came the fourth stage of scientific method, the long series of experiments which Dr. Fleming and later Dr. Florey and others carried on to test the validity of Dr. Fleming's hypothesis. This led to the final stage, the solution of the problem. Penicillin was established as a drug of amazing effectiveness against infection. These, then, are the elements of the scientific method. First, perception of the problem. Second, preliminary observations to suggest solutions. Third, the development of one or more hypotheses. Fourth, the testing of these hypotheses through extended observation or experimentation. Fifth, the choice of a workable solution to the problem. This is the method the scientist applies to any problem in which facts can be observed, and this is also the method of common sense. Thinking people use the same method to solve all the everyday problems having to do with observable facts. For instance, scientific thinking is as necessary to a garage mechanic as it is to a scientist.
Well, Joe, she just died on me. I'd say the gas line's clogged.
You think so? How do you know?
Well, it could be, couldn't it?
Yes, it could be, but it could be any number of other things, too.
The first thing a mechanic has to do is determine what the problem is. Next, he makes a preliminary investigation to find possible solutions. Then, he develops his hypotheses. Next, he tests these hypotheses, discarding them one by one if they prove false, until finally he hits upon the right solution to the problem. With problems of this kind, of course, almost everyone tries to think systematically. But some people find it hard to apply the scientific method to all the other problems that can be solved through observation and experimentation.
Did you hear? There's another epidemic down at the south end of town.
Oh, how terrible.
You know, I think the town ought to do something about conditions down there.
Do something? What can they do? Look at the kind of people that live down there.
People? What do you mean? You can't just blame people for bad living conditions, for filth and disease and things like that.
Oh, I think you can. After all, that's the way that kind of people like to live.
I'm not so sure. I think the town ought to do a study of those conditions and get at the cause of it.
Some people let prejudice dictate the answers to problems. But thinking people realize that solving such problems requires systematic observation and the gathering of many facts. All the factors bearing on the problem have to be investigated. Then, the facts have to be studied to find the best ways of solving the problem. And finally, the most promising solutions have to be tested in practice. This scientific method of thinking applies to any everyday problem which lends itself to observation and testing, to problems of business as well as to problems of family life, to problems of law enforcement as well as to problems of making the decisions of the community. This is the method of common sense thinking fully as much as it is the method of science. But the scientist uses this method for a deeper purpose, to gain an understanding of the world in which we live. For instance, long before men were able to combat disease, the causes of disease had to be discovered through years of scientific investigation. The French scientist Louis Pasteur began his work as a practical effort to stop the diseases attacking silkworms and certain animals in France. Systematic observation led him to the hypothesis that the cause of disease might be found in the bacteria present in diseased organisms. He devoted much of his life to testing this hypothesis, to a succession of careful experiments with animals. This intensive experimental work eventually enabled him to establish his hypothesis as a demonstrated theory, that bacteria are, in fact, the cause of disease. This scientific discovery brought about a revolution in the practice of medicine, enabling modern medical specialists to make great advances in understanding and conquering disease. Keen perception of problems, careful observation, imaginative development of hypotheses, rigorous testing and experimentation, choice of the most workable solutions. These are the steps essential to the scientific method of solving problems. And while most of us are not engaged like the scientist in the mysteries of the universe, we still may use his method in everyday life. For this, the scientific method is a tool for clearing and effective action.
Come out and play with me, and bring your dollies three. Climb up my apple tree.
Oh, hello, Kay? This is Nick Baxter.
Oh, hello, Nick. How are you?
Fine, thanks. Say, Kay, next Friday, would you like to see Wagon Train at the movies?
Oh, I'm sorry, Nick. I suppose you've got your mind made up to see it?
You've seen it? She's already seen it.
Neither should your periods and other punctuation marks cut through the paper like this. On the electromatic, the type bars are operated electrically. First, you start the motor by pushing this switch. Then strike the space bar several times to see if your motor is running. If there is no carriage movement, you'd better check the electrical connection. The motor turns this power roll. Which operates the type by turning these cams. All type impressions are mechanically made uniform, regardless of how hard you strike the keys. A light touch on the keys is all you need. Be sure to shut off the motor when you stop typing for any length of time. Most people do their spacebar stroking with the right thumb. Left-handed people may use their left thumb. However, do all your spacing with one thumb. Hold your thumb naturally, not here, but here, and stroke the spacebar with the lower side of your thumb. When the shift key is depressed, your typewriter prints capital letters and the special characters above the number and punctuation keys. When using the shift key with the left hand, keep your F finger on the home key. When your right hand is used, keep your J finger on the home key so that your guide positions are not lost. At first, shift evenly in 3 counts. Shift key down, keystroke, shift key up. Later, with experience, you can speed up the action this way. Remember to start this way. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. If the shift key is not pressed all the way down on manual machines, floating capitals will result. Avoid these incomplete strokes and poor timing of your 3-count shift motions, and floating capitals will be eliminated. To write a number of capital letters in succession, press down the shift lock key. This shifts the type in some machines and raises the carriage in others, and locks it so that only capital letters and uppercase characters will be written. To release the lock, press down either shift. Operated by the motor, requires only a light touch on the shift key. On the burros, the operation is identical. To backspace, use your little finger on this like this, for additional backspaces. Frequent use of the backspace key for striking over lightly struck letters indicates poor stroking form and wastes time. And don't backspace to strike over incorrectly struck letters. Those are errors which you should not have made, and if made, should be erased neatly. On the electromatic, the backspace key is operated electrically. It requires only a light touch. The tabulator key is operated with the little finger of your right hand. Without taking your eyes from the copy, the key is held down until the carriage reaches the set position. On machines equipped with bar tabulators, indent by stroking the tabulator bar with the first finger of your right hand. On the electromatic, the tabulator key is on the left. It is only necessary to touch the tabulator key. You need not hold it down until the carriage stops. The carriage return lever is usually at the left. This lever returns the carriage and at the same time operates the line space mechanism so that the paper is set for a new line. On manually operated machines, learn to return the carriage with a quick circular movement of your left hand, avoiding unnecessary effort and lost motion. Learn to judge how hard to hit the carriage return lever, so that the carriage returns the whole way without banging against the margin stops. That was not hard enough. That was too hard. That was better. Your hand should drop from the lever when it is about in line with the left frame of the machine, and should be back on the keys when the carriage reaches the right stop. Now watch this in slow motion. For additional line spaces, after the carriage has returned, strike the carriage return lever as often as required. On the electromatic machine, the carriage is returned by touching this key with the little finger of your right hand. The Burroughs works in the same manner. As the carriage returns, the paper is automatically advanced for the next line. If additional line spaces are required on the Burroughs or the electromatic, touch the carriage return key lightly, as many times as necessary. Now let's see about paper insertion. This is the paper table. This is the paper guide. This is the paper bale. And this is the platen. The paper guide can be moved to any point on the paper table. Its position in relation to the carriage or line scale is determined from this scale on the paper table. L.C. Smith, Remington, Underwood, and Woodstock machines have similar scales. The paper tables on the electromatic and Burroughs machines do not have line scales. Therefore, the position of the paper guide is determined by inspection. The paper rests against the paper table and the paper guide as it is fed into the machine. The paper bale holds the paper close to the platen. This prevents paper drumming, keeps the paper from flapping, and makes your type impression sharp and even. These rubber rolls should divide your sheet in even thirds. Otherwise, this may happen if you turn your paper back. paper feed rolls are out of sight under the platen. These rolls and the platen feed paper into the machine and hold the paper in position. To insert paper rapidly, arrange it so it can be handled easily. Pick up the sheets with your left hand, fingers above and your thumb below, near the middle of the left edge of the sheet. Place the sheets on the paper table, with the left edge against the paper guide, and the top edge firmly touching the feed roll. With your right hand, give the platen knob a rapid twirl, and turn the sheets to the writing line. As you let go of the platen knob, bring your right hand forward, and with your right thumb, move the paper bale in place so that the paper is held firmly under the paper bale. You can do this in 5 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now watch the counts and motions blend into one continuous action. Let's try it on a machine with a different kind of paper bale. When you use a carbon pack, be sure to use smooth carbon and insert the pack squarely in the machine. If you don't, this may happen. This means wasted paper and lost time. Improper feeding also means crooked paper. When this happens, use the paper release lever, which releases the pressure on the feed rolls and permits the paper to be adjusted. Line up your paper with the paper guide. Then turn the paper down and check it with the alignment scale. The paper release lever is always back of and inside the platen knob and projects upward like this. The electromatic, however, has the release lever at the left. Be sure to use the paper release lever when you take out letters or copy. This is not advisable. It bothers other people, wears the line space ratchet and gears, causes carbon paper smears, and rubs the paper sizing into the platen, making it glossy and causing paper slippage later. The carriage can be moved to the right or left by holding the platen knob with your fingers and pressing the carriage release lever with your thumb. Machines have 2 carriage release levers, one at the right and one at the left. When you understand the basic technique, the next most important thing is intelligent and purposeful practice.
Paperwork. Oh, those dollars go.
Worse every year.
Figuring percentages really gets me.
It's the budgets. I chew up more pencils. Markups, discounts, too much, too much.
There's gotta be an answer.
Introducing the answer. A really small calculator, a really silent electronic, a really fast thinker, one that works anywhere on battery or plug-in, one with all the calculator know-how you'll probably ever need. Introducing the world's smallest electronic calculator from the maker of the world's most complete line, Sharp. Introducing the LC8, world's smallest electronic calculator by Sharp. Price tag to match, $345 complete. LC8, the answer. See it.
This is an emergency meeting of all departmental heads of the XYZ Furniture Company. That's Mr. Armstrong, the president. He called the meeting to discuss the loss of a $75,000 order. This has been one of several large orders lost in the last few months. According to Mr. Johnson, sales manager, it was production's fault. But according to the production manager, Mr. Smith, his department was not at fault. Let's take time out and analyze why this order was lost. February 1st, the $75,000 order for Futura chairs was signed at the customer's store for delivery before March 15th, in time for their annual spring sale. February 4th, the order was mailed to the plant. February 6th, it was received at the plant. February 8th, the order went through a credit check, where there was a 2-day delay because of the amount of small orders being checked. February 13th, the order was typed in the sales department. A couple of new girls were being trained on the job, thus causing another delay. February 14th, the order was checked for accuracy by another girl. A mistake was found and it had to go back. More lost time. February 15th, the order was received at production control. February 18th, a clerk checked the inventory status of Futura chairs. He found there was not enough in stock to fill the order. February 19th, the order was passed on to the production scheduling group to determine how soon the necessary chairs could be built. By February 20th, the production schedule had been analyzed. It was found necessary to revise all production plans in order to meet the March 15th delivery date. February 21st, based on this new plan, the supply of raw materials was checked. Not enough in stock to even begin filling the order. More raw materials had to be obtained. February 22nd, the order for raw materials was typed, verified, and signed. This was done more rapidly than usual because now they realized they were in trouble. From February 22nd to March 4th, they waited for the raw materials. Meanwhile, preparations were made so production could begin as soon as the materials arrived. March 5th, the raw materials arrived and production began. March 19th, production completed. March 21st, the furniture was finally ready for shipment, but it was 6 days too late for the customer's spring sale. Order canceled. So the furniture went to the warehouse instead. The bottleneck was paperwork. Actual production took only 16 days, but it took 28 days of paperwork and delay before production could even start. However, the problem did not end there. According to the chief accountant, the profit and loss statement for February showed that they had built up their warehouse inventory of colonial-style furniture to $150,000. This style was not selling as well as predicted, so they had to cut the price to $120,000 to get rid of it. This meant a loss of $30,000. To make matters worse, still more colonial was in production. By this time, everyone was well aware of the problem. But what was the solution? How could management control be improved? Hire 100 more clerks? No. There's a more practical solution. Industry has a powerful new tool for handling paperwork operations and for improving management control. Electronic data processing.
Electronic data processing. Genie of business. Almost like a story out of the Arabian Nights, electronic data processing has suddenly appeared as a new helper for the businessman. A machine with many of the characteristics of the human mind, it follows management's instructions exactly. This is not tomorrow's dream. It is equipment ready and available for use today. There are electronic machines available in many price ranges, including large equipment, medium-size equipment, and even small equipment that can be applied to numerous computation problems in business. What are the major characteristics of this new management tool? First, and perhaps most significant, is the computer's ability to carry out a long series of operations without human intervention. To accomplish this, the machine has stored inside it all of the different procedural steps that it must follow. When there are several alternative procedures that might be used in a given case, the machine automatically selects the right procedure and follows it. All of these procedures can involve many thousand individual instruction steps. The second major characteristic is that of memory. The machine has two basic types of memory, one being a large volume type of memory for storing the files of the business. The other is a small volume, high-speed memory where all of the procedural steps are retained. To illustrate the large volume memory, a life insurance company might have several 100,000 active insurance policies. All of the information on all of these policies can be retained on tapes such as these, and the machine could search automatically for a desired policy record. The third major characteristic of these machines is speed combined with accuracy. Instructions and data stored on this rotating magnetic drum can be selected by the machine in a few thousandths of a second, or can be selected from these magnetic cores in a few millionths of a second. Reports for management can be printed out at fantastic speeds also. This printer can print up to 10 lines per second. From the teletype or from typist, information on punched paper can be fed directly into the computer. In watching an electronic data processing system in operation, you are struck by how few people are involved. This impression is misleading. There are more people behind the scenes than first meets the eye. In fact, the real challenge for electronic data processing is getting properly trained people. There is an urgent need for systems engineers who lay out the broad procedures under which the system will work. Then there is the need for skilled programmers and coders who write the detailed procedures for the machine. A new type of machine operator is needed who understands the operation of the machine and can get the work out on time. Tape librarian and tape changers who make sure that the file tapes are properly identified, and accurate data recorders who enter the information into the system. Eventually, we will see the work of the automation engineer, where the computer will directly instruct the machine tools in the production shop as to what parts to make and how many to make. The machines are here. Automation of the office can be a reality. Electronic data processing is truly a genie which can improve the competitive position of a firm, and it is here now.
To understand how these systems can benefit management, let's see how they operate. First, input. As a sales order is typed, the same information is punched on a paper tape and then transferred to magnetic tapes. One full typewritten order is stored on about 1 inch of tape. The magnetic tape then becomes the file of the sales orders, arranged alphabetically by customer name. All information ordinarily contained in several filing cabinets can now be stored on one reel of tape for faster reference. Next, processing. The electronic system includes a computer which performs functions such as checking, posting, analyzing, scheduling, summarizing, statistics, inventories, and so on. These processes reduce the mass of input data to the key information necessary for effective management. This one system operates faster and more efficiently than innumerable clerks. A high-speed printer translates this information in machine language into written human language, such as credit reports, shop orders, inventory reports, accounting reports, and so on. But computers will do more than clerical work. They can present to management essential data for more efficient control. For example, suppose the electronic system predicts not enough in stock for anticipated orders. Management is notified and can take action. Suppose actual sales are greater than predicted sales. The high-speed electronic system would detect such a trend immediately and would automatically compute a revised sales forecast. This allows management to adjust production to avoid bottlenecks. All this takes place at a speed impossible for any number of clerks. And now back to the XYZ company. How would this speed, accuracy, and greater control have saved their $75,000 order? First, sales orders would be typed and the paper tape punched at the numerous XYZ sales offices throughout the country. The tape would be airmailed or fed into a teletype line. The customer file tape unit would spin to locate the customer's record, and the processing machine would check his credit rating. If found satisfactory, the processing machine would go to the second tape unit, the furniture inventory file. The system would check the inventory level of Futura chairs. If there were enough, it would automatically order shipment from the warehouse. However, if the inventory were too low, as happened with Futura, it could notify management immediately. Management could then take action and use the electronic system to schedule the necessary production. Raw material supply would be checked automatically. If there were not enough raw materials in stock to build the required chairs, the machine would print out a purchase order. With the issuing of this order, the paperwork would be completed. This speed and efficiency would have saved 20 days for the XYZ company. The production deadline could have been met, and the $75,000 order would have been saved. But the advantages of electronic systems go far beyond this for XYZ, in fact, for everybody. For example, the consumer will pay lower prices. The customer will be assured of earlier deliveries. The salesman will have better customer relations. The employees will be engaged in more supervisory work and a less monotonous routine. The controller will always have up-to-the-minute financial reports. The department heads will have fewer crises, and the stockholders will have less of their investment tied up in inventory. Management will benefit most directly. The electronic system will provide all necessary data in time for effective forecast and control.